time you first paid attention, or your attention was drawn to Mr. Christian's loud voice, was Mr. Ford already involved?
Yes, it appeared he was in a verbal altercation with Mr. Christian.
Okay. So what was your assessment of Mr. Ford?
My assessment of Mr. Ford was that he was a gentleman that obviously had either military training, a family with military training, larger man, probably somewhere in the range of 320 to 360 pounds. Definitely somebody that can take care of themselves. But the way that he was speaking was very polite. And it was loud, but not quite a yell, more just firm speech, which would indicate a level of, what would you call that, manners, taught and built in as a personality. And so I just kind of assumed that wherever he was, that's where he would be.
I'm not sure what you mean by the last statement. Wherever he was, that's where he would be? What do you mean?
Geographically speaking, as in I did not think in any way that he wanted to get any more involved than he already was currently. Or that he did not feel willing to, or for whatever reason, he did not seem to want to engage in the situation apart from attempting whatever conversation he was attempting with Mr. Christian.
Okay, I think I understand you. And did you then make a judgment that that was not adequate to the situation, something more had to be done?
I wouldn't put it that way, no.
How would you put it?
I would put it as that was fine, good, acceptable perhaps for him. I simply wanted to make sure there was an added layer of separation between Jeremy and the young ladies.
Okay. And is that why you decided to get involved?
That is why I decided to get up and stand where I did during the time that I stood there, yes.
Okay. In this situation, your initial impulse was, I think, motivated because of the two girls that were seated there. Is that right?
I would say so, yes.
Okay. And while you're saying your action wasn't very much, if I'm hearing you correctly?
I would say at that point, yes.
You actually got the desired result, I think. Would you agree with me? That is, Mr. Christian no longer focused, if he was focused on the girls, he was no longer focused on the girls.
Absolutely.
Okay. So that was an action that maybe got the result you wanted.
Yes.
But actually prior to your involvement, Mr. Ford had already gotten that action because Mr. Christian was already focusing on him.
Yes.
Were you aware of that?
No.
Not really?
Not really.
So do you think that if you had taken a little more time, you might have realized that Mr. Ford was already diverting the attention to himself? And maybe that was a solution right there?
I mean, I suppose it's possible. Say
Nothing you thought of at that time?
Possible.
You do recognize there was a time after you came down and engaged with Mr. Christian, both of you yelling, he actually stood up. And then, after a while, you turned back towards Mr. Ford.
Yeah.
You remember that?
Yeah.
Okay. What about this? When you came down, did you hear Mr. Ford tell you he's just talking, no need to fight?
I believe that was after I came down.
When do you believe that was?
So I remember getting up, walking down the staircase. I say a bunch of angry things, stand next to Mr. Ford. I'm having a verbal altercation with Jeremy. And then I turn, and Mr. Ford says, "I'm done with you. I'm just going to ignore you." And then then he said to me, "He's just talking." In that order. That's what I remember.
That's your recollection?
Yes.
You noted that you wanted to de-escalate the situation.
Yes.
Is that right?
Oh, yes, sorry.
So I take it that would mean to kind of calm things down.
Yeah.
Do you think it was a good strategy then to come down yelling and saying harsh things really loud and engaging in a shouting match?
Objection. The question is argumentative.
I'll sustain the objection.
Okay. What did you have in mind in terms of de-escalation? What did you think was going to work?
Giving Mr. Christian something to focus on that wasn't them so that hopefully they left or got far enough away to be safe.
Once you came down and drew Mr. Christian's attention to you, would you agree that the two teens were no longer in any danger?
Absolutely.
So then something else happens, and you noted this morning you heard kind of this loud noise,
Yes, sir.
and you understood that to be Mr. Christian striking Mr. Namkai-Meche. Is that right?
That is what I believed at the time, yes.
Do you still believe that that was what happened?
No, I have been shown differently.
Okay. But at the time, that's what you were responding to.
Yes.
Okay. And so, again, you made an assessment about what was going on, right?
Sure.
And whether or not to be involved.
Huh.
And if I understand you correctly, your decision to be involved at that point was because you believed there to be actual violence, physical violence happening at that moment.
Yes.
And that is, you believed that Mr. Christian and Mr. Namkai-Meche were actually in a fight.
No.
No, how would you describe it?
I would say that they were getting prepared to be in a fight, and really would have been a lot less of a fight and more of an assault of sorts.
Because of your observations about Mr. Namkai-Meche not being prepared?
Yes, it's actually a little bit deeper than simply being unprepared. He's just looked like a friendly person. He did not look like the kind of man that, even if he wanted to, he would hit you. He just didn't seem like the kind of person to engage in such behavior.
So you made a determination to get involved to help Mr. Namkai-Meche?
Yeah.
Because you believed that if there were to be a fight or an altercation or some sort of violence, he wouldn't do well.
Correct.
So essentially you're stepping in to help him out.
Stepping in to replace him.
To replace him, okay.
Yeah.
Once you got involved, it seems as though your effort was to get Mr. Christian away from Mr. Namkai-Meche, for one, right?
Yes.
And to get Mr. Christian off the mess.
Yes, hopefully. Not myself, but yes.
Not yourself?
Yes, like for instance, I did not plan on physically dragging him from the train.
I think that you talked about the fact of, or the desire to make it perfectly clear to him that that was the best option for him. Is something like that?
Yes, no. So to encourage him to realize that yes, that's just the most constructive option for him at that moment. Again, not to physically remove him myself, simply to put in a position where once he does the math in his head, he goes, you know, this is pointless. Fuck it, I'm going home.